Good morning. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to class. Today, we will start off by covering Chapter 11 on emotion and motivation. Let's take a look at the lecture schedule from the syllabus, which I adapted a little. And you can see that we are starting Chapter 11 one day early. We were scheduled to start it on Wednesday, but I'm starting it today. And that's because it's a longer chapter, and I want to make sure that we have time to get through it. You'll also notice that when I adapted the schedule, I didn't realize that we had April 7th available, but Friday, April 7th is in fact our last day of lecture. So that works out to 6 lectures for this chapter. So with that, let's get started. Something caught my attention on the very first page of the chapter, and I'll read that to you. The heading is Challenge Your Assumptions. And here's the text. Meet Elliot. He's a white male, 30 years of age. At first blush, Elliot looks and acts pretty much like everyone else. He's well-dressed and socially appropriate, and his scores on tests of intelligence, memory, and language are boringly normal. Yet, Elliot is different, very different from the average person in 2 ways. First, he's recently recovered from brain surgery. He was diagnosed with a tumor, and he underwent an operation to remove it. Okay. And he also lost some surrounding brain tissue. Second, his behavior differs from before the surgery. Okay. Before that, he was a successful business person, and now he's different in that he's devoid of emotion. So the heading was Challenge Your Assumptions. What assumptions does this make about the average person? Who is the average person? Any thoughts? You guys all still asleep? Okay. So the average person has emotions. I think that's fair. It assumes a certain level of emotion from everyone. Yep. Back up. Look at the first paragraph. So the average person is a myth. No such thing as an average person. How are we characterizing that prototype? Who is everyone? So he looks and acts basically like everyone else. Yeah. So Alyssa said white middle-aged males. Okay, so he's a white male, 30 years of age. And that's what everyone is like. Yeah. He's well-dressed, socially appropriate. So that describes class privilege. Okay. A lower class person might be rough around the edges, not so well-dressed and socially appropriate. And he scores on the middle of the distribution for a bunch of tests. Okay. And so there's an assumption that the average person, the prototype person, is an able-bodied white male that's also class privileged. And when you read stuff like this and you look at who the textbook authors are, there's a high chance that the authors fall in that demographic. Okay, and they see everyone as normal people belong to that demographic. But then we otherize people who don't belong to that demographic. Okay, and there's a risk is that psychology as a discipline becomes a psychology of able-bodied, class-privileged white people. And then it does a disservice to the very large portion of the population that does not fit in that category. I'd say the majority of the human population. And then they say he's very different in two different ways. And basically, one of them is that he's had an illness and a surgery, right? And then the other one is that he has a disability. Actually, a lot of people have had life-altering accidents of some kind. And one reason that people can really struggle with that is that there isn't a social script for how you deal with it. Like some people are, on top of their careers, they have everything going for them. And, one day they wake up in hospital, like maybe they had a car accident, maybe they had a stroke. And then their new goal is relearning how to swallow or how to walk. And that can be a very shocking experience for people when there's shocking anyway, but one thing that makes it harder is that there's no social script that says, yeah, actually this happens to people. And they cope and they move forward. Academia is a very kind of young, able-bodied place. And there was a time about a year ago where I kind of got to the end of my tether and I took an intentional mental health break from academia. And going into the world outside of the ivory tower was surprising in some ways. One of the first things that hit me was how much abundance there is in the world, like how much great stuff there is for everyone, because I'm used to a culture that's about scarcity. Like you're never good enough. You're always reaching for the next thing, and it's a scrap that everyone's fighting over. And I remember feeling, shocked by all the abundance, right? And the lack of competition, because my normal world is one of manufactured scarcity. And the other thing that shocked me was how many people had disabilities, right? Even, physical disabilities that you'd notice. And they were kind of a normal part of society in the world. Because in my little bubble, I almost never see anyone with a visible disability. So there's assumptions here about what normal is and what different is that reflect a specific context and culture, which is academia. And academia is not the whole world. Though your textbooks and your profs might act like it. All right, on to the subject of the chapter, which is emotions and motivation. So humans are the only animals that have language. But we aren't the only animals that communicate. So if you have a cat or a dog, then you regularly communicate with that animal without the use of language. Meow is not a word. Meow is a feeling. And your cat looks at the dish and says, meow, you get it. And your cat hisses at you and swats you, you get it. Okay? You're able to read that animal's behavior well enough to figure out what its motivations are. There's something about the noises it's making, the facial expressions, the body posture that is telling you something, okay, about what its state is and what its motivations are. So the people in these pictures aren't communicating verbally either, but I have a hunch that you know what's going on. So let's say A. What emotion is that person demonstrating? I see a comment for a cat owner saying that, when you live with cats for your entire life, you know their language. It's not language, but I understand that you can communicate with them very well. And yes, so the first one is happiness. Happiness is a big, fuzzy philosophical construct. I know your textbook uses it. I think that we're probably safer calling this joy. What's the next one? What's B? Yeah, B is surprised. You call it astonished. What's C? Yeah, C is worried or fearful. And so there's certain facial expressions that people use in all cultures when they experience joy or when they're surprised. Okay. Another universal is wow, I'm looking up at something that's cool. And you see here that there's certain way that the face moves when somebody's afraid, right? They furrow their brow. Okay. And what's D? What's going on there? Yeah, D is sad. So the corners of the mouth go down. Eyes look like they're about to cry. And apparently the lady at E has a 1980s Japanese hairstyle. Marcus, I'm guessing you're Japanese. What's going on with that lady in E? What emotion is she demonstrating? She's angry. And with anger, you can see that the eyebrows go down in a different way than they do with, say, with fear. And they're not going up as if it was surprise. Okay. And another cue is the lips are pursed. Okay. Angry people sometimes purse their lips. And what's going on in F? Yeah, F is disgusted. So with disgust, we wrinkle our noses. Ew, yuck. So maybe it's disgust. Maybe it's contempt. Contempt, some say that contempt is a basic emotion. Some say that it's a blend of, disgust and anger. But what's going on here is that you guys are recognizing an emotion, okay, through nonverbal signals that are people's facial expressions. They don't have to tell you how they're feeling because you can see it. Expressing emotion is about more than facial expressions and what you say. It extends the whole body language. Right? So somebody who's angry might be waving their hands around. Okay, they might have their hands on their hips. Somebody who's sad would be slouching their body. They'll look like they have no energy, like they're giving up. And then when people win or achieve something, this expansive body language just goes, yeah, okay, that thing. Also cross-cultural. So these must be hardwired somehow. And it's interesting that animals have them too. At least other mammals. Your textbook defines emotions as a mental state or feeling associated with our evaluation of our experiences. But that's not the only definition of emotion that's out there. I teach from a different introduction to psychology textbook, and that other textbook, with just as much authority, described an emotion as a response of the whole organism. So it's like a reaction to something. It's a response. And that response involves physiological arousal. And the first thing I think is, well, what about sadness? Sadness is emotion. Kind of being sad is the opposite of being aroused. It involves expressive behavior, so we can read emotion on people. They might even talk about it. But it's also possible to conceal your emotions. And it also involves conscious experience arousing from one's interpretations. The definitions can be criticized. Right? Like, do you have to be conscious of your emotion? I think research on subliminal priming. We show somebody an angry face subliminally, and that's subliminally, and then they act more hostile. I might not know they're doing that consciously, still doing it. You can conceal your emotions. Does there always have to be a physiological response? Like, there are people who have nervous system damage. There are people who have spinal cord injuries, and then their heart rate wouldn't increase if they were afraid. Do they still have emotions then? What I've heard is that their emotions are more kind of cerebral and not experienced viscerally. It is really, really hard to pin down good definitions. We struggle with this in psychology. And people debate definitions for years. And there'll be multiple definitions. Okay? Your textbook simplifies things, as I would say it should as an introductory textbook. Here is a dictionary definition of emotion. I think it comes from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And it describes an emotion as a natural, instinctive state of mind that derives from one's circumstances in various ways. That it is an instinctive or intuitive feeling, as opposed to like reasoning or knowledge. But what these definitions are putting forward is that it's some kind of a state that's instinctive. So it corresponds to some kind of a primal drive. And we'll discuss those when we talk about motivation later in the chapter. Your emotions are motivations. They're instinctive states. They come from the older, more primal part of your brain, right? Your limbic system. And they answer to what are fundamentally really basic drives, like the 5 F's, okay? Feeding, getting mates, fighting, right? Responding to threats, being afraid of threats, running away, and then also affiliating, since we're social beings. Different emotions reflect different brain activity. However, we have a very limited ability to visualize the brain. Okay, those brain scans show like broad areas of activation. And so, but brain scans have suggested there's different brain circuits for different emotions. Okay, so negative emotions seem to be lateralized to the right frontal lobe, and positive emotions like happiness, enthusiasm, feeling energized, and I believe also anger, are lateralized to the left frontal lobe. But then those scans also show a lot of overlap. Okay, they'll activate different emotions, will also activate similar regions. Maybe that means that there's an underlying pattern of arousal that emotions share. So your emotions come from the limbic system. Okay, it's also known as the paleo-mammalian cortex. It's an evolutionary older part of your brain. Okay, the limbic system is the part of the brain that's involved in behavioral and emotional responses, especially for those survival behaviors. Okay, the F's: feeding, reproduction, caring for young, fight or flight responses. Okay, that are about primal motivations to survive and reproduce. And emotions are primitive to abstract thinking and language. Animals, children that don't or haven't yet developed the faculties of reason all show emotion. Okay. And the limbic system is an evolutionary older structure that developed over the primitive olfactory system. We're very visual, and so we forget how important smell is to other animals. Okay, but you know this if you have a dog. They sniff for food. They sniff to see what other dogs have been around. They sniff each other. Butts usually, right? The first thing they want to do is stick their nose in your crotch. Tomcats can smell a female in heat from like 2 miles away. So in most mammals, a sense of smell is important to those fundamental drives, and they rely on them a lot. So it makes sense that the limbic system evolved over and around the olfactory system. So the limbic system has a role in motivation, as we just discussed, right? Also in memory. It includes your hippocampus. Your hippocampus is involved in the consolidation of long-term memories and in spatial memory for location. And you know that the amygdala is involved in emotional responses, like especially fear, aggression. The hypothalamus, I think of that as a thermostat or a feedback center in the brain that regulates your drives. It's involved in your sense of hunger and your sense of satiety. Oh, I don't know how to pronounce that. Feeling hungry and feeling full. Okay. It includes the thalamus, which is like a switchboard center in your brain. It sends incoming information to the right places. And then your limbic system also includes the cingulate gyrus. What's that? And is it pronounced gyrus or gyrus? I wouldn't know. I'm guessing it's gyrus. Anyway, that's a component of the limbic system that's involved in processing emotions and in behavior regulation. And it's also involved in the regulation of autonomic functions, things motor functions that fall under your autonomic nervous system, such as digestion and heartbeat. So if the anterior cingulate cortex was damaged, then you might end up with autonomic dysfunction, and the autonomic nervous system wouldn't function properly. Okay, and that could affect involuntary bodily processes like heart rate or blood pressure and digestion. Your autonomic nervous system manages those fight or flight responses. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response, and then the parasympathetic nervous system is what you do after you fight or flight. It's the rest and digest part of your nervous system that calms you down once you're away from the threat. People of the female sex tend to experience more variable emotions. Okay, there's more ups and downs, and to have more negative emotions. This is particularly true during the childbearing years. In childhood, boys and girls don't differ on negative emotionality. This hits at puberty. Okay, then through adulthood, women have much higher rates of anxiety and depression, mood disorders. That levels off after menopause. So there's some connection to hormones there. Why is this the case? Well, we can speculate. Evolutionary psychology is a discipline of speculation. It's possible that a woman's emotions are not adapted to her as an individual. They might be adapted for the mother-child dyad. Little children do lots of foolish things that would be difficult to predict doing. My mother told me about a friend of hers. That couple lost their 3-year-old daughter. She died suddenly, and they didn't know why. And on autopsy, it was discovered that she had stuck food up her nose, and it had spoiled. So you have to be watching that kid pretty much all the time, because it's going to do something like stick food up its nose or run out into the street. And so it makes sense for mothers, right, for women in general who would historically tend to become mothers, to have an anxious trait, a hypervigilant trait, a trait of imagining many threats, because in practice, these can come true. And much older children still do many risky things. That goes up through adolescence. Okay, teenagers do many reckless, dangerous things. So that's a lot of worrying over the life course. Many emotional reactions can be generated automatically. This contrasts with or contradicts some of the cognitive theories of emotion that say that they're based on, your interpretation and your understanding of events. And we can see that with research on subliminal stimuli. So if subjects' behaviors, attitudes will change if they are shown a subliminal angry face. Okay, that makes them a bit more hostile versus when they're subliminally shown a happy face. Remember that subliminal stimuli are ones that are shown so quickly or in such a way that you notice them less than half the time that they are presented. Here is an example from a study by Winkelmann, Zions, and Schwartz. And they showed people a Chinese symbol. I don't know what that symbol means. And they asked people to basically to judge it, to say how much they like the symbol. Do you like that symbol? I don't know what it means. Marcus, do you know what it means? I see you put a symbol in the chat. And Marcus says it means beauty. You're asking me if that's right, and I don't speak Chinese or Japanese, so I don't know. I'm taking your word for it. That in the control condition, people were visually primed with a subliminally presented polygon. Okay, so that'll be your comparison group. And then other subjects were showing subliminally a happy face or an angry face. And those who were shown the happy face liked the symbol more than those who saw the polygon or the angry face. And those who saw the angry face liked the symbol less, just trying to feel a little hostile, I guess, than people who saw the polygon or the happy face. And so what this shows you is that emotions can be brought on without people even really being aware of it, and it can affect people's behavior. Here's another interesting unconscious process. If you take a pen, hold it between your teeth, it'll improve your mood. Why might that be? Well, one hypothesis, remember that a hypothesis is something that still needs to go get tested. Okay, just because somebody hypothesizes something or theorizes something doesn't mean it's true. One hypothesis is that there's some kind of a feedback, and the particular hypothesis in your textbook involves feedback from blood vessels. I don't know how that one's supposed to work specifically, but basically it tells your brain that the muscles that are normally engaged in smiling are engaged. So whatever the mechanism is, and I don't think we really know what the mechanism is, it is true that on average, people who engage those muscles feel happier, and people who hold the pen by its tip for their teeth feel a bit worse for doing that. So your facial expression can influence your emotion. Maybe if you fake smile, you'll feel a little better. And that's an automatic, non-cognitive process. Your textbook floated the idea that it could be classical conditioning, but I do not follow that line of argument at all. Because in my book, a smile, when you're feeling happy, is an unconditioned response. Just like salivating to food is an unconditioned response. So I don't know where they're coming from with the idea that this could represent classical conditioning. I couldn't follow that line of argument. If you understood it, let me know. So much of our emotional expression is nonverbal. Okay, comes through facial expressions, gestures, body posture. And even if you're telling somebody that you're happy when you're not, well, maybe your true emotion will spill over into your nonverbal behavior. That said, we can fake emotions. If anything gives us away, it's that the micro expressions don't really add up. So a real spontaneous smile is called a Duchenne smile, and it engages. So it's more than about having smiling lips. It also engages the muscles around the nose in a certain way, and it engages the eyes. Okay, so the eyes wrinkle up, get some crow's feet. with a fake smile might produce the smiling motion of the lips, but you're missing the other micro expressions, right? Doesn't engage the nose or the eyes in the same way. That said, body language is hard to read. It's ambiguous. And, I was looking at that and thinking, I've seen people make that face at me, but I always thought it was like empathy or concern. So if that was a fake smile, I totally misread it. There are cultural differences in the expression of emotion. Okay, so there is strong similarity across cultures, but different cultures have different display rules. And display rules are about how, when, and where to express emotions. So at funerals in, Anglophone society, maybe you're supposed to be respectfully quiet and look a little sad and maybe wear black. But there are other cultures where really loud wailing is considered appropriate. In Western culture, it's considered less appropriate for men to cry. In Eastern cultures, it's more acceptable for men to cry. Okay. And there's an interesting study described in your textbook about how there's a norm of deference to authority in Eastern societies. And they found that students from the Asian students were more likely to sort of politely smile at a gross and gory video, whereas when they were shown the gross and gory video alone, they made as many yucked out expressions as the white subjects. Okay, and the white subjects looked kind of grossed out in front of the authority figures. Apparently, the study showed that the Asian students were polite and looked sort of happy, like, thank you for showing me this interesting film, when the authority figure was present. Western cultures are more individualistic. Even within a single culture, there are different display rules for different people from different groups. And I find that one of psychology's weak points is awareness of social power relationships, of awareness of social systems, and of, say, who they privilege and center and who they marginalize. I was surprised, like genuinely surprised, to learn from a couple of Black men at my other university at St. Mary's that, because they both volunteered this information, and there were separate conversations, and I'd never heard this before, but they both said that they didn't feel able to express their anger, that they had to be very mindful of expressing any frustration, okay? Because they had to be constantly aware of how their anger or frustration might make white people feel uncomfortable or threatened. And I have never read anything about that dynamic in an introductory psych text, right? Or in my entire graduate career in psychology. We make these assumptions about the normal person and the average person and everyone. And one of these men was a PhD student in my cohorts, and he passed away quite tragically at a conference. And after he died, there were some sort of statements or interviews with administrators from the university, and this one article in the CBC said many lovely things about him that were true. He was a really lovely person, and he was very, very much missed. But one thing I read totally caught me. Said that he had a way of connecting to others, of wanting to learn about them and making them feel comfortable. The last conversation I had with him before he passed away was about how he had to be aware of making white people feel comfortable. And if I hadn't have had that conversation with him, I just would have read that and thought, oh yeah, he made people feel so comfortable. But I wouldn't have known that that was actually his way of surviving a social milieu that was white privileged. And Trinique says, I relate to that because I have been told that I'm intimidating, angry, and loud just for my presence to my white counterparts. And well, why shouldn't you be angry? Like, maybe there's something you should be angry about, but there's this idea that you should not be angry. You should be grateful, probably, right? And that your anger could make the white people feel uncomfortable. And it's about centering white comfort, right? So because of this, I thought let's delve deeper into the emotion of anger and think about it in a way that's more contextualized. So anger is an emotional state. It involves a sense of discomfort. It involves a non-cooperative response to a perceived provocation, hurt, or threat. It's non-cooperative because when you're angry, you don't want to go along to get along. Right? You want to put your foot down. You've had enough of that. Okay? So it's your fight response. And it's evoked by people's misdeeds that we see as willful, as unjustified, and avoidable. And it can also be evoked by smaller frustrations. That day where lots of little things go wrong and you just kind of blow up. There's an interesting connection between anger and power, between anger and the social dynamics of dominance and submission. Anger is associated with increased testosterone. Testosterone is a hormone that does many different things, but it's also about winning. Okay? And anger is seen as inappropriate for those of lower social status. Okay? People of lower social status who get angry are, well, seen as out of control and dangerous. And the response is seen as inappropriate because in a power relationship, they're supposed to be grateful, not angry. But it's fine for the higher power people to be angry. Okay, then it's seen as justified, as righteous. So here's a theory of emotion that comes from philosophy, not psychology, but I find it quite interesting. And according to Solomon's cognitivist theory of emotions, anger is something that is expressed between equals. Okay? And it can be healthy because then you take action to address the harm or the threat, okay? To set boundaries, to promote justice, to redress grievances. But in human social life, there are hierarchies and power differences that affect the expression of emotions generally, but particularly of anger, because anger can be strong, right? Anger can be powerful. Anger is a fight response. Fighting is threatening. Okay? So according to this theory, anger exists between equals, but a higher status person would see a lower status person with contempt. And contempt is a mixture maybe of, anger and disgust. Okay, they see the target as unworthy. There's cool disregard. If you've ever been treated in a really offhand way, like when your experiences don't matter, maybe you're in trouble, but you don't get to even go to the meeting about it. Maybe there's meetings or emails sent behind your back and they make decisions without you because including you isn't important. And contempt comes with a set of attitudes or behaviors. They may think that the target should remove themselves, or maybe somebody else should do it. The maid should take this spider out of the room. And so they don't confront or deal directly with the target. There's a sense of removal, a practice of social exclusion. And the contemptuous person might never talk to the contemned, but they might talk to other people about it. They might go gossip to their friends about how awful this other person is, but without ever talking to that other person. Okay. And then resentment is the anger of somebody with lower status towards somebody with higher status. And it's like anger combined with fear, with bitterness, with disappointment. And you might feel hopeless. Because what are you going to do about your angry feeling when you don't have the power or the permission to express it, to act on it, when it won't be taken seriously, when you might be retaliated against for expressing it? So if you ever get into studying like conflict resolution, I want you to remember this, because that whole area of psychology constructs conflicts as between equal status parties, when in fact, that's often not the case in human social life. So with resentment, what can you do about it? Right? Resentment can be really poisonous because it sits inside you and eats away at you. And people can fall into kind of act in sulky ways and fall into a downward spiral or act out inappropriately. And they might feel that the only thing they can do is let go, because what can they do about it? There are many theories of emotion in psychology. And these theories describe emotions. They try to explain why we have emotions. And there's a speculative character to many of them. Right? There might not be that much empirical evidence to support them. And, some studies will support the theory and some won't. Technically, in science, it only takes one instance to disprove a theory. Okay, but there's this lack of certainty. And so we end up with a bunch of theories and inconsistency and disagreement between theories. And this reminds me that psychology is a young discipline and we have a long way to go. And think about where chemistry was 500 years ago, and it's still alchemy. So we're working on understanding emotions and where they come from and what they're about. Discrete emotions theory hold that we have a small number of basic distinct emotions, and that these can combine to form more complex emotions. And it would say, I think it's very reasonable to imagine so, that emotions have biological roots. They serve adaptive functions. Okay? They come from your limbic system, and they precede the thoughts that we have about them. And there's a universal quality to the expression of many emotions. They're seen in all cultures. They're seen in animals, even though display rules differ between cultures. So there's good empirical support for 7 primary emotions: joy, disgust, fear, sadness, surprise, anger, and contempt. But remember, there's different theories, and Solomon's cognitivist theory of emotion does not see contempt as a basic emotion, but rather one that combines anger and disgust. But what discrete emotions theorists would say is that these are associated with distinct facial expressions. Disgusted people everywhere seem to do this thing where they wrinkle their nose. And these expressions are seen in people who are blind from birth. People who are blind from birth still smile. And they're associated with certain physiological responses. So like fear increases the heart rate. Yet many share a similar physiology. It always surprises me that love and lust aren't on this list, like bedroom eyes. Anyway, we're at 10:20. I'm going to stop the recording there. Thank you for your attention.